with the concept of peer review. I tend to wear a couple of hats. One is an academic, and the other is working on a small company that works in publishing and other text mining applications. And when I speak with my colleagues, they're oftentimes asking me, so what does the publisher do for us? And I try and always remind the publisher, distribute your content, they polish it, they make sure that there's an archival version, but they also provide all the necessary quality control, and this is typically done through peer review. And so there are a lot of checks that actually are being carried out on a routine basis that remain hidden, I think, from most authors, and I don't think that they always recognize the amount of work that's actually done, first by the publisher and then subsequently by the peer reviewers, especially if they haven't done a lot of peer review themselves. Not only do you need to check for the facts, the scope, the style, completeness, and clarity, it's also really important that to get a good peer review, that the people that are actually reading the articles need to make sure that the arguments that are being presented are sound. They also need to make sure that the conclusions are based on the data that's presented, and they too are sound. The other thing that we also see, and there's an interesting article that appeared in eLife that's dealing with the appearance of words and how they're actually changing in publications. And one of the ones that's appearing with increasing frequency is novelty. And the question is, how much of what's actually being published is really novel, and what kind of evidence there is there when you actually go back and look in the literature? Now, when we look at publishing costs, the peer review process is really a fairly expensive process for all the parties involved. And I think this is one of the things that really needs to be taken into consideration, and where actually can there be some kind of cost savings, because one of the areas that we've been looking at in semantic technologies is what can we actually do to make these technologies useful. Clearly, the publishers need to maintain an infrastructure, and that infrastructure is fairly expensive. It includes both hardware, software, and personnel. But we also have a lot of people who are volunteers who are actually spending a substantial amount of time reviewing articles. There are over 2 million articles a year that are being published in the scholarly literature. And if you take into consideration the rejection rate and the number of peer reviewers, we're looking at someplace between 8 to 12 million peer reviews that need to be done in the scholarly publishing business on an annual basis. That's a lot of work. It also takes a lot of time. Obviously, when you submit an article, a publisher could probably turn it around and publish that article without peer review in about 8 to 10 days. But the problem is when you go out to peer review, you have to worry about contacting the peer reviewers. You have to make sure that they actually deliver, and sometimes this can take weeks or even months. The other thing you have to concern yourself with as an editor when you're looking at peer reviewers is what's the quality of the work that's coming back from peer reviewers. Are you getting perfunctory remarks, or are you getting detailed peer reviews that are sometimes longer than the article itself that's being reviewed? So you need to balance that, and you also need to make sure that there are no biases that are being entering into the system. You also need to worry about how many peer reviewers are available and how many different people are competing for that pool of peer reviewers. And so these are the sorts of things you really need to start thinking about, and how much of this can actually be automated. This is something that we've been looking at now, and we think there are a number of things that are tractable. One of the things that's clearly tractable is we can do a lot of the fact-checking automatically directly from a Word document. We can read the documents at the time they're submitted and essentially do deep annotation, make sure that we can check all of the factual pieces of information automatically, provide this for the author, for the peer reviewer, and for the editor to make sure that whatever is being delivered is in fact technically correct. We also can look at the completeness and the structure of the documents. Even in a Word document, it's possible to essentially develop algorithms to essentially scan through the document and make sure that everything that's being delivered is structurally correct, and that all the pieces that are supposed to be there are available to the editors, and you make sure that it doesn't go out to peer review until all of that information is available. Now, the other problem that you run into as an editor is trying to identify peer reviewers. Any editors in the room here? This is a real challenge, because today, especially if you're editing on a journal that has an impact factor, say below 8, you're going to spend a lot of time trying to find people who are going to be willing to review that article for you. And it's not uncommon to go out and have to contact 8 or 10 different people before you can actually get 2 people who will actually accept the assignment and then deliver on that assignment. This is what takes a huge amount of time in the editorial process. The other thing you need to worry about is whether or not the people that are responding have a conflict of interest. Do they work together? Are they part of the same institution? These are all the sorts of things you can actually screen for semantically. Other kinds of things that you want to do is you want to make sure that you give the editor actionable information. If I'm going to look for a peer reviewer, I want to know what their history is. Are they working in the same field? How much are they published in the same field? Why are they going to want to read the article that I'm actually sending to them? And so we want to make sure that there's a lot of relevant information for the editor, and most importantly, what's their email address? You could spend hours sometimes chasing after email addresses. This is a huge time suck for anybody that has to edit. The other thing that we do and would like to do is to make sure that we can create a compelling invitation for a peer reviewer. We want to make sure that we tell them why we would like them to review this article and make sure that we're sending them something that's going to be exciting to them or interesting. Because the sure way to get something rejected is to have an article that comes to you that's completely off topic. And we want to make sure that the response and the performance of the editors or the peer reviewers is in fact something that we can follow. So what we offer is a series of semantic annotation tools, one is which we call the Scribe. It's our kind of engine which does a lot of our semantic annotation. What it allows us to do is completely go through documents in about a minute, do all the fact checking, look at all the associated links, all the terminologies, make sure that all this information is correct before it goes into the reviewing system. It's something that actually can save us a lot of time. We also want to make sure that the articles are consistent and they're thorough, and make sure that all of this can once again be done before the article goes into the peer review queue. And we want to make sure that whatever we do, we don't overtax our reviewers. So if we can screen something out, if it's not complete, if all the pieces are there, we want to make absolutely certain that we don't send it to a peer reviewer. So the tool that we started working on about 4 or 5 months ago, we're now in the testing phase, is our peer reviewer recommendation service. What it allows us to do is take a manuscript. It's basically a drop and drag interface. It can also be tied into other systems. It will completely read the complete manuscript. It will then go out and it will do a match of the manuscript to a database, typically around 40 to 50,000 articles in the same area, and allow us to find those authors who are working in the area that's closely aligned to the one in which this manuscript fits, look at their credentials, and present this to the editor so that they can actually select these individuals. And then what it does is it will craft that email message and allows us to essentially find out who might be the best peer reviewers. Now, the proof is when you actually start doing this, and I think the best case we had was earlier this week. I was working fairly late at night, and I sent out an invitation for an article that I had received just to test and make sure that everything was working when we had done a revision. I sent the article, the invitation, to an author in Japan and one in New Hampshire. I'm in the central part of Michigan. Within 20 minutes, I got a response back from the Japanese author who agreed to review the manuscript. And at 7 in the morning, when he read his email, I got an acceptance from the individual in New Hampshire as well. So this does work. And I think it's just a matter of matching the right people to the articles. And so this is something that we're happy to essentially discuss with anybody who might be facing these same problems. It allows us to overcome a lot of the problems that are out there right now in peer reviewing. So thank you very much for your time.